Everyone is joining now.
Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to another event at IFLS, another talk by one of our visiting fellows. I'm sorry we started with some delay. This talk is going to be recorded for your information. We had some technical issues on the part of the speaker. We have Mitra Shamsi here, who's been with us at the IFLS for the year. She works on the intersection of gender studies, media and communication, as has been the case with our other talks here at IFLS with a smaller audience, talks given by the fellows. Instead of giving a rather lengthy biography, I'll ask the speaker to say something more general by way of an introduction about her overall work and research projects before we hear more about this specific project that Mitra has been working on during her fellowship stint. So Mitra, welcome to this event. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. If I can ask you to to use this time to kind of introduce your overall scholarship and research interest before telling us more about the specific theme of this paper, that would be probably easier to visualize this specific paper. So if you could please take about 30 to 40 minutes, perhaps not longer, so there's enough time for Q&A, that would be great. The floor or the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I'm very happy to have this chance to share my works with you. I'm going to thank especially dear Professor Saberi for letting me to have other people and other scholars feedback on my work. And I particularly thanks dear Lily, who supported me in this fellowship. This talk, in fact, is part of my continuing work on the mediation of Iranian feminist activism and debates around gender issues on social media platforms. Centering its analysis on the generation of narratives and images on Instagram, my research interrogates the production and circulation of feminist discourses by Iranian feminists and women's rights campaigners. In my original work, applying a digital ethnographic approach, media practices and the strategies of self-mediation of activists are investigated, and it shows how rival feminist discourses at home and diaspora compete for visibility and legitimacy on digital platforms. In this talk, I'm going to present part of my work, and I focus on the most visible discourse in the feminist digital materials and campaigns, which I frame as forms of popular feminism that center on the mediation of individual women's self-branding and empowerment. Main question of my research is, could Iranian feminist digital activism be framed as a form of popular feminism, as Sarah Bennett-Weiser puts it, and how women's issues and claims are manifested in digital materials, and which solutions are proposed by the activists for gender inequality in the country. The subsidiary research question is, with which other discursive frameworks do different issues performed online? I'm going to start with an example to show to you what I mean by feminist digital activism in my research. To contextualize my research, I provide you with some facts about Iranian women's movement. And after introducing the research conceptual framework and methodology, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the feminist discourses in which women's issues and demands are constructed online. And after that, I focus on the popular feminist mood of digital activism by Iranian feminists. On 20 December 2017, Vida Mowahed, an Iranian woman, stood on an electricity utility box in Engelab Street or Revolution Street, one of the most iconic streets in the center of Tehran. She tied her white headscarf to a stick and waved it to the crowd as a flag to protest against compulsory hijab After she was arrested by the police, by the moral police, she #WhereIsShe became a trendy topic on Iranian Twitter. Her practice was followed by some other women who later were called Girls of Engelab or Girls of Revolution Street. Recorded materials of their activism went viral on social media platforms, symbolizing the long-standing suppressed demands of Iranian women to make choices about their own bodies. As you may know, since the 1980s, veiling has become a legal compulsion for all Iranian women, regardless of their religious affiliation or personal choices. Thus, the hijab is a controversial topic which many feminist activists are hesitant to raise. The activism of Girls of Engelab created fierce discussion regarding the hijab with different points of view on social media. This is only one example of how digital media has emerged as parallel and substitute public sphere for debates relating to issues and demands of Iranian women, which are neglected and underrepresented in the offline milieu, particularly due to the contextual facts of the country, which I'm going to give you some points about it. As I'm so sorry. You have my voice now?
Yes, we do, Mitra. Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. We have some problems with the internet in these days, and I apologize. By and large, the Iranian political structure has always afforded minimal opportunities for women's movements. The introduction of social media platforms into Iranian society and the subsequent widespread virtual presence of Iranian people, particularly women, coincided with a new period of suppression and oppression of women's rights activists and their media channels after the conservative takeover and the US Comprehensive Sanctions Act of 2010. Therefore, many of the public debates relating to women's issues have transferred to digital platforms, which have emerged as a parallel public sphere. Consequently, women activists created their own accounts and profiles, either individually or collectively, which are followed by a considerable number of users. Activists are appropriating discursive opportunities provided by the digital technologies to be able to make known their claims to target groups and to obtain substantial support for social and political change. Online campaigns emphasize and prioritize long-term struggles around women's issues, mainly engendered by the Iranian women's movement, which in turn reshaped the wider movement, transforming how to protest against gender inequality is performed and altering the social composition of the participants. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the conceptual framework and methodology of my work. In this context, which I describe, inspired by Sarah Bennett-Weiser, I frame part of activist digital campaigns as forms of popular feminism, as a way of understanding their connection with transnational feminisms and Western feminisms in combination with their characteristics as nationally focused causes. Bennett-Weiser considers popular feminism as one force which, alongside popular misogyny, characterizes gender politics in the contemporary moment. She maintains that we are living in a moment in which feminism has become popular, in part because it manifests in discourses and practices that are circulated in popular and commercial media, such as digital spaces like Twitter, blogs, and Instagram. Bennett-Weiser believes that in the current media saturated and visualized culture, some expression and manifests of feminism become spectacularly visible compared to others, yet competition for visibility in the context of economic of visibility works to erase political and structural feminist critique in favor of simpler, depoliticized narratives. However, Bennett-Weiser believes that popular feminism is expressed all over the world. Her work and the other research in this framework focus only on the experiences of North America and Europe. In this research, I aim to examine the concept in the context of the Iranian digital feminist activism and connect it to the discussion on the challenges and opportunities of digital activism for Iranian activists. Applying the ethnographic approach, I seek to engage with the complexity of the field. Organized observation of the study is conducted on photo and video sharing social networking service Instagram for some reasons. Because the first one is that affordances of Instagram, as Donna Boyd says, make it a desirable location for qualitative research. Instagram encompasses a visual culture which transfer meaning through text alongside pictures, emojis, multimedia, and hashtags, which could be considered as a potential place for the emergence of popular feminism. Based on the latest national surveys, Instagram is the second social media with the highest volume of usage inside Iran, following WhatsApp, which is used by nearly half of the Iranian over 80s, more than 70% of the youth, and 69% of the educated people. To inquire about the characteristics of popular feminism as it is expressed in the context of Iran, and to investigate the most prevalent and frequent terms and subjects related to women and gender, I conducted a content analysis on material shared by 4 well-known activists during the summer of 2021. These activists are chosen for their popularity based on the number of followers they have attracted and visibility and the rapidity of their reaction to gender-related events, which make them more visible in comparison to other feminist discourses. The analysis consists of overall 60 posts, including the text, visual image, stories, and hashtags, which have been published online during the study. And I try to show how these activists are framing women's issues and what types of solutions they are raising. Before I started to talk about popular feminism, I'm going to share part of my research on different discourses which I have identified on digital media. I have distinguished 4 intersected and overlapping but distinct discourses in which women's claims and demands are constructed on digital media. popular feminism, legal discourses, Islamic feminism, and socialist feminism. The prevalent discourse on digital media, one of the prevalent discourse on digital media is legal discourse, which is predominantly right-oriented, introducing the demands for change in the law as the absolute solution for the gender injustice in the country. In this discourse, the government's gender policies in different realms are criticized dominantly in a liberal feminist framework. However, the doors for negotiation with the government remains open. In the other words, the main chosen mode of protest in legal-based digital campaigns is pursuing reform through making suggestions on policy and legislation, primarily through digital petitions. Discourse labeled Islamic feminism, or more precisely, religious revisionist discourse, could be considered an attempt mainly by female liberal feminists, Muslim activists, to reconcile Islam and women's rights by presenting their woman-friendly reading of Islamic texts in generated digital media content. In this religious revisionist framing of the gender issues, counter discourses are produced, on one hand, in the response to secular activists who often argue that Islam is unable to deliver justice to women, and on the other hand, to challenge the conservative and male-dominated interpretation of women's rights in Islam. While in many cases, in liberal legal-based language is adopted by Islamic feminists, in digital media, they seem careful to promote certain interpretation of women's rights that do not directly oppose the government's ideological and religious policies. Leftist in its political orientation, socialist feminism aligns itself with anti-capitalist approaches and promotes post-colonial feminism. Adopting an intersectional approach, social categories such as class and ethnicity are considered in the analysis of gender issues and inequality. Socialist feminists criticize the government for not providing adequate and equal opportunities for women's economic and political participation, particularly for less and underprivileged groups of women. Most of the digitally circulated content in this framework could be considered working politically behind the government's red lines, which are reflected in the main themes of the discourse. By that, I mean women's situation in the labor market. And I'm going to start giving you some inspiration about the popular feminism. As I told you before, inspired by Saab and Advisor, I framed the most spectacularly visible feminist discourses on Instagram as popular feminism, which is highly dependent on the visualized culture of the digital media in order to increase visibility. The number of activists' followers is considerable compared to other activists inside the country or well-known classic feminists in diaspora or collective feminist pages. Therefore, their content might be accessible to a broader range of users. They also seem to adopt media strategies in order to broaden their visibility. The discourse is mainly constructed by female activists in the diaspora who adopt a transnational feminist perspective and provide women inside the country with wider alternative feminist ideas. In addition, what Van Advisor maintains about the popularity of popular feminism as a condition of being liked or admired by like-minded people, which brings out exclusion and backlash, could be observed in the sample profiles which I studied. On one hand, activists are called feminist educators who opened women's eyes to their rights by some followers. Comments which are welcomed by the activists. On the other hand, the opinion of opponents is called vulgar, disgraceful, which are rooted in people's old-fashioned and stereotyped thoughts by activists. On the other hand, I observed that some other feminist activists call popular feminists naive and illiterate women who are presenting a cheap populist version of feminism, or the ones who live their life in European countries, talking about issues which are not the priority of many ordinary women inside Iran. The form of their popular feminist campaigns, for instance, how the Me Too movement campaign is working in Iran, is under criticism by some feminists inside or outside the country. In addition, a first discussion between activists and their supporters on one hand, and people, particularly men with misogynistic approaches, could be observed. The mode of activism by popular feminists could be considered individualistic in some ways. Their pages are based on the activities of single women compared to pages which are run by women organizations or communities in which the name of the campaigners are less important than their causes. Activists are constructed as narrators of women and gender issues and demands so that they are depicted in the position of being qualified to determine what is in line with feminism and what is anti-feminist. The position gives them the priority to give advice to other women about how to be a good feminist or how to combat against patriarchy or gender inequality. However, it could not be denied that a collective dialogue is in some cases formed in activist pages. It is observed that a network of connection is shaped between activists who, for instance, support each other or hold common live talks around gender issues. In addition, some activists give platform to ordinary women to narrate their experiences. This activity is categorized as a sort of digital feminist sisterhood by activists or their supporters. As I mentioned before, feminist activists under the study try to make a personal connection with their followers, mainly through sharing their personal life and personal images. 1/3 of pictures were dedicated to activist self-portrait, which was completely irrelevant to the text of the post. These activists, which are affected by the affordances of digital media, could be considered as a way of making trust, which provides activists with a source of social and cultural capital in a way that they are known as a celebrity feminist figures. It is what other scholars have maintained. For instance, Tafakkuri, 2021, discussing some popular feminist campaigns on hijab, maintained that they center on the mediation of individual empowerment, frequently through forms of emotional authentication, which solicit trust in the individual as a brand. Or Batmanqelichi and Muri, in this regard, also conclude that this source of digital campaigns have been synonymous with their individual influencer and feminist celebrities rather than their causes. Mina Naeli raises concerns about the fact that by encouraging individualism and interest in gaining personal popularity, personal social networking profiles can threaten activists' collective identity. As I'm going to describe later, a diverse range of themes related to women and gender issues is raised in the popular feminist discourses, from sexuality to motherhood. However, it mainly focuses on mediating individual women's self-empowerment through numerous messages about self-love, self-care, on subjects in the post about women's physical and mental health, body positivity, self-confidence, and self-empowerment. Besides, mediation of the female body and women's bodily experiences seems to have a central position, for instance, in advice related to health and bodily related subjects such as menstruation, menopause, pregnancy, and childbirth, which seems to have an educational aspect. However, in some pages, the female naked body is the subject of the discussion, through sharing pictures of female sexual organs, menstrual blood, or half-naked picture of users, which hashtags such as my body or taboo about the female body. It is said that the goal of publishing such pictures is to make the female body asexualized and show women agency and authority over their own bodies. However, Bennett Weiser and her colleagues, Rosalind Gill and Katrina Rosenberg, denounced popular feminism's renowned focus on a woman's body as a site of liberation. They believe that emphasis on individualism, choice, agency, and love your body and confidence discourses is resistance to interrogating structural gendered inequalities and lacking a subtext of self-care as a political warfare. Some scholars like Khiabani, 2015, discussed that discussed that in this digital activist, there's a mismatch between local context and concerns, and the framing and reception of this concern outside the geographical boundaries of the local in some of the feminist digital campaigns. However, it was not possible for me to determine target audiences of popular feminists due to the diversity of the themes they cover in their pages, which some of them are completely related to broader range of people, broader range of women. Besides, I can claim that this discourse lacks the intersectional approaches which I observed in analyzing women issues in the socialist discourses, for instance, where problems and news related to less privileged groups of women, for instance, female taxi drivers or carpet weavers in remote parts of the countries, is covered. So far, I talked about some characteristics of the popular feminism in the context of Iran, and from then on, I'm going to give you some prevalent and frequent themes that I categorized and extracted from the posts shared by activists, for activists. The first one is criticizing patriarchal and misogynist discourses. Criticizing patriarchal and misogynist discourses is the most frequent theme, which I found in around 1/3 of the sample posts. In this post, traditional beliefs and fiqh, or Islamic jurisprudence, are introduced as the root of some of the gender inequalities. Besides the fact that tradition, religion, and even laws are supporting the sexist approaches in the society is criticized. In addition, men, particularly intellectual ones who claim to be egalitarian, but in fact benefit from their privileged position, and presenting gender-blind analysis and try to undermine Iranian feminists, are target of criticism by feminist activists. The political structure is also blamed for being an organized patriarchal system marginalizing women. The main strategy to fight against the discourses is attempting to strengthen feminist discourses, presenting alternative women-friendly analysis by female and feminist social activists, and promoting an alternative version of masculinity which is not toxic. Activists use everyday developments in the country as an opportunity to raise their causes about the importance of women's rights to choose their dress and to condemn compulsory hijab. For instance, they use pictures published about violence by the moral police against young women who do not adhere to the compulsory dress code to denounce the formal hijab discourses. Activists believe that freedom to choose dress is a universal and obvious human right, and describe compulsory hijab as a way to control women's bodies in the name of honor. They attempt to challenge the government's formal discourse on hijab, particularly what is considered the prototype for Iranian Muslim women. The Iranian misogynist and patriarchal society are under fierce attack by the activists for a structural normalization of sexual harassment and abuse. Activists blame rape culture, including victim blaming and slut shaming, which they believe prevent women from narrating the pain and harm caused by sexual violence and harassment. This theme is intensified in the new wave of allegations of sexual abuse against some well-known Iranian artists, musicians, and academicians. In the same line, in a chain of posts circulated by activists in line with Me Too movement in Iran, the legal process of reporting sexual harassment cases is criticized, and they argue about the failure of the legal system in this regard, which alongside traditional cultures support the rape culture. In the context of sample posts, inadequate or unequal laws regarding marriage, child custody, financial share of women, And household labor is mentioned as a main factor leading to women's unequal situation in Iran. The discussion on these topics adopted human rights and legal language in which the failure in legalization is considered a way to deprive women from their civil and human rights based on their gender. The legal discourse, which is based on Islamic faith, is strongly denounced since it is claimed that this type of legalization leads to misogynist and unequal laws which aim to retrograde women. The solution which is proposed by the activists in this regard is claiming equal rights with a feminist and egalitarian approaches. The study coincided with Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, which made Iranian feminist activists widely pay attention to Taliban misogynist laws and its consequences on the life of women and sexual minorities in the country. In Afghanistan. For instance, concerns about women being suppressed and eliminated from the social sphere are being expressed by many activists. In other example, a female governor who resisted against the Taliban was praised broadly by Iranian feminist activists. Due to the cultural similarities, including Farsi language, which is the formal language in Iran, and first language of around half of the people in Afghanistan, transnational solidarity by seems formed between women from Iran and Afghanistan through stories and narratives by women from Afghanistan being published online by Iranian feminists. Besides, I observed a number of movement artifacts being shared by Iranian activists, including images of street protests by women in post-Taliban era and multimedia or songs praising their resistance against Taliban. In addition, these developments in Afghanistan provide Iranian women with an occasion to compare the Iranian Islamic government with the Islamic Emirates based on the similarities of their anti-women attitudes and attempt to marginalize women and gender apartheid. The Iranian government was criticized for what was claimed to be supporting the Taliban. Raising awareness about sexual relationship and sexuality is among prevalent topics in activist posts on Instagram. The importance of women's consent to sexual intercourse is the most cited topic. In this regard, the Islamic tradition and traditional culture are denounced because of not identifying women as sexual agents. As you may know, in Islam, it is obligatory on women not to refuse their husband if they call them for intercourse, in case they do not have any excuse. It is reflected in Iranian marriage law, and it is criticized by activists broadly. Activists emphasize that women's sexual consent is necessary for their dignity, and not considering it as a necessity could be categorized as marital rape. In the studied cases, gender is defined as a human, not natural, constructed continuum, and it is discussed that a diverse gender and sexual orientation should be respected and realized. The society's strict standards for sexual minorities is under attack. Activists talked about homosexual transnational individuals experiencing a dehumanizing situation, not only Iran, but also all over the world, through presenting statistics of their homicide or mental disorder, which they believe is a result of lack of awareness and education about people's sexual and gender differences. They blame people, including followers, for playing an active role in the systematic violence against sexual minorities. Traditional definition of femininity and motherhood are challenged by activists broadly. They attempt what could be called desacralization of motherhood and question the formal discourses on the good woman as it is advertised by the government and religious organizations. Activists believe that such discourses and definitions are a way to deprive women of civil rights and to limit them, and it's a way to punish women through strategies like labeling when they discomfort with such definitions. The last term, which I categorized and extracted from the post is women's household labor and unpaid care work. A considerable share of content is dedicated to this subject, particularly by which is experienced particularly by unemployed women who experience loads of household labor without any insurance and leave of absence. Society and family are blamed for calling such women in such a situation irresponsible freeloaders, housewives. In this regard, the lack of legalization to compensate women's household labor is under criticism by activists. The form of compensation, which is currently identified in the Iranian law, is considered humiliating, since it is based on the hypothesis that women do not have a common share in the family life and can only claim vague the lack of as a housekeeper from their spouses, from their husband. Activists advise women for claiming legal financial equal shares and also shared child custody. As this frequent attempts show, some of the classic feminist concerns and demands, keywords, and could be observed in what popular feminist activists publish on Instagram. In addition, structural gender and sexual inequalities are recognized, and in some cases, cultural, political, and social causes are identified by activists as the root of these inequalities. Banadweiser and her colleagues introduced popular feminism as apolitical in the framework of the Western societies. Some Iranian scholars, such as Talebian and Talebian 2017, call this type of digital feminist campaigns as forms of slacktivism. Or on the other cases, pornography of network feminism, which is described by Shah Qasemi 2020. In contrast, I argue that in the context of the Iranian political system, which affords minimum opportunities for women's activism and women's movements, popular feminism could be considered as a mode of activism, even a mode of political activism, being possible by affordances of digital media, which so far has been successful in highlighting women's issues and making women demands, which are neglected on the other sphere. This, however, does not mean that it is not necessary to be aware that popular feminist discourses is promoting a culture of individualistic self-care, and which is intertwined with concepts such as happiness, success, and balance. And in some cases, it is presenting a simplified version of feminism, which is combined with images and narratives of activists' happy personal life. In addition, however, in the popular language of the activists, it is argued that struggling with misogyny and patriarchal discourses is necessary for gender equality. Finally, individualistic strategies such as self-empowerment, self-confidence, positivity, and taking care of individual mental health care are proposed by activists, which, as Naeli maintained, can threaten the collective identity of women's movements. Therefore, I conclude that my research showed a process in which popular feminist discourse is regenerated and reinforced in the Iranian digital media. Banetweiser 2020 argued that we observe an explosion of popular feminism. However, we observe an explosion of popular feminism. The visibility of feminism could help to pave the way for more mass and oppositional and grassroots feminist movements. In this line, I hope that the other feminist discourses, which I showed currently manifested on digital media, could benefit from affordances of digital media, particularly Instagram, with a considerable number of users in Iran, to be able to contribute to the feminist digital activism actively. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, I think, for the inconvenience of disconnecting my internet.
Thank you so much, Mitra, for this interesting presentation. I have a question, but I think I will save that for later in the conversation and prefer to take questions from the audience. So I think from the audience, if anybody wants to ask a question, you could just raise your hand and ask, unless Mitra prefers that the question typed in the chat. Do you prefer that people type their questions, Mitra?
I can hear the question, but if I couldn't understand, I would ask
For
people to
sure.
write it up for me.
For sure. Okay, so with that, any questions in the audience?
Niloufar, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Mitra, for your fascinating presentation. I have a question. Do you think there is any differences between Iranian feminists inside and outside of Iran in terms of their demands or their approaches regarding women's issues like rape, sexual harassment, and something like that? Do you think there is any differences between approaches of these two groups or not?
Hello, Niloufar. I'm very happy to hear your voice. As I said before, in my research, I couldn't find any. I couldn't define the. Let me rephrase the answer. In my research, I haven't worked on the bunch of demands and issues which Iranian women want inside the country in comparison with in the diaspora, because I think it needs a very broad research. We have heard that many feminists allegate each other of not being update about what a woman inside the country wants or what the priorities they have. Then I cannot say that there is this difference exists or not, but I can say that feminists who live abroad, who are working in diaspora, have taken into a transnational and international feminist language, which in some points are not familiar for Iranian women. For me, the intersectional language which some discourses adopt is more close to what women inside the country want or are struggling for. But since I haven't worked on this subject, I prefer not to define such differences. I hope I have answered the question correctly.
Any other questions in the audience? So if not, maybe I can raise one, and then that might lead to other questions. So Mitra, although it was never explicit or an avowed commitment in your research, it sounds like overall you take the virtual world or the possibilities that digital communication provide to be a positive force in enhancing not just the agenda of expanding and also strengthening women's rights, but possibly more importantly in generating new ideas in the community of activists, and overall, basically not just as a tool of communication only, but also as a tool for more substantive generation of or generating of ideas. Because it's one thing to say that communication does what it's expected to do, which is obviously bringing people together and facilitating any kind of work that activists are doing. But it's a far more radical claim to say that communication is actually more than that. Communication is generating new ideas inevitably. So although you never actually say so, my interpretation, or I think any reasonable, possibly a reasonable interpretation from your generally positive outlook to the role of digital communication is that it's able, or it has the capacity to generate new substantive ideas and new meaning in the field of women's rights activism. So first of all, my question is, if this interpretation, if my reading of your proposal is correct or not. And secondly, if it is in fact the case that you see digital communication as an overall force of positive change substantively, would you be able to actually give us a sense, or have you ever done any research on, so to speak, on cons? So you have talked about the pros, the advantages, but what about the disadvantages of digital communication in possibly negatively impacting the advocacy of for women's rights? Do you see any disadvantages? If you do, what they are? I hope that was clear.
Okay, yes, it is. Firstly, I'm going to say that I do not confirm that I only believe in positive consequences of using digital media for advocacy or for endeavor for social change. Because when I use the word mediation, or when I mention affordances of media, it means that I believe that there is I believe in agency of people who are appropriating social media for their causes, for instance, feminist activists in Iran. If I want to say it clear, I would say that in my opinion, there is a relationship between the affordances of media and agency of people who use this media for their work, whatever it is, in or subject for activism or for movements. Therefore, I would say that there are negative and positive, we can imagine negative and positive aspects for using or appropriating social media for advocacy or for social justice. However, in the case of Iran, since women activists do not have any other channels, digital media could be considered as the only ones that they can use and that they can grasp. And I think it's what they have understood, and it is why they are using digital media broadly. As you surely know, every in-presence activity by feminist activists inside the country is banned and would encounter with unbelievable expenses. It is why in this context, I think digital media are playing their roles. However, by saying that digital media being used by popular feminists, they have been using it as a way of self-branding. I think I have raised the negative aspects of using social media for social change.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. So that's great, thank you. So basically you have a more nuanced, so you view technology basically as a tool. It does not really give any direction, either way, positive or negative, and you count on the agency of individuals. But here is my question: if that's actually the case, because there are all these talks of, you know, technology having an impact on the thought process, because obviously the speed of communication is, you know, you can't even begin to compare with what was before, not just in terms of speed, but also in terms of the different methods, meaning that, you know, a lot of communication, if you're talking about Instagram, is image-based right now. And so that might in and of itself have an impact on the way and then the kind of impressions that people quickly can pick up. And so is it actually then still possible to say that communication, media, technology, all of these are just neutral terms? They are completely neutral tools. They have no impact. They could possibly have negative impact, as you said that you have highlighted that, but they don't have any implications or any consequences in terms of the direction that they may give to different social movements. So is it really, would it be reasonable to assume that all of this technology is just a neutral device, is a neutral tool with no quote unquote political or ideological consequences for social movements in general, and then women's rights movement in particular here? So are you advocating for the neutrality of technological modes of communication?
I wouldn't say that technologies and digital media are neutral, but I would say how they affect our society is related to the intersection or interrelation of their affordances and of their possibilities and limitations for society, and to the context of the society, and how people or people agents are using these sort of technologies. For my research, for instance, if I want to explain, I believe that the visual culture behind the Instagram, or visual affordances of digital of Instagram, for instance, have contributed to the emergence of popular feminism. In this sense, Instagram is not considered neutral. However, how Instagram is used by different activists are different, and I think in different contexts, in different society, how it is used is different, and the effects of it and the share of users are different. I think it shows that the context of the society in turn impact on the digital media or other technologies. If I want to conclude, I believe that social media isn't neutral. However, it is the influence of it on the society is affected by how it is used by activists or by people. However, I do not deny that there is some affordances that give some opportunities for people here, for activists, and limit them in some ways.
Okay, thank you so much. So in other words, it's very difficult or it's impossible to determine any potential complications that might arise in the impact that different or modern modes of communication might have, or any positive consequences that they might have. It's very difficult then to determine any of that in advance. I guess that's where you stand on the matter. Thank you so much. Any other questions? or maybe I can push you on one more question. So where are you hoping to take this research? What is the next step in your research? Do you have any other research questions that basically would be a continuation of what you have already done? Do you have any works in progress at this point? Or you're
At the
basically
moment,
researching
sorry.
that? Go ahead.
At this point, I'm working on different discourses, as I mentioned, different from popular feminism, and I'm trying to conducting a discourse analysis on these different sorts of discourses which I have identified on digital media. The next step for me, hopefully, would be working on how imaginations and feelings and of Iranian women are formed on social media. I'm interested in connecting my work to affective theories which are common in digital media, on digital media in recent years. And I'm interested in adding memory, feeling and emotion to my work in the future, hopefully.
Interesting. And also trauma, right? The impact
Yeah.
of communication and trauma and the perceptions of trauma.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is all very interesting. Any other questions before we close? If not, then maybe we can move to close. But if there are any questions, there is still time. Okay, then thank you so much, Mitra, for the presentation. I wish you all the best with the future stages of this work. And thank you all for
Thank you
attending
so much.
the event. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Leah.
you.
Thank you, dear Hengam.
Thank you, Mitra.
Thank you, all the part. Thanks.